There are operations. This one has gotten a great deal of publicity.
Yeah, they're dead Americans as a result of this failed and reckless program. So I would say that it hasn't gotten enough attention, has it, Mr. Attorney General?
All right, we have breaking news on the botched U.S. gun operation that intentionally put guns in the hands of drug cartel members in Mexico, and the investigation into whether those guns were used in murders. Now, the House Oversight Committee is set to release a stunning new report today that we are hearing will suggest that the Justice Department supervised the program and then tried to stonewall attempts to find out what really happened when the program went awry in Mexico.
Now, from what I've been told, Mexico is going to be livid, outraged when they see the congressional report that shows that U.S. officials could have cared less when guns they intentionally sent south killed people in Mexico, not just drug dealers, but innocent victims and cops. Now, President Calderon, in a recent Univision interview, soft-pedaled the issue. But after tomorrow's testimony on Capitol Hill by Senator Grassley, the whistleblower agents and the family of Brian Terry, that is not going to be the case. Now, remember, it is illegal to buy a gun for anyone but yourself. So if you come into a gun store and want 3 or more assault rifles and pay $2 grand in cash, that's suspicious. Yet, look at this internal Fast and Furious document. In the first column are the names of the gun buyers. In the second column, you'll basically see when Fast and Furious began investigating these guys. The third column is the number of guns they bought before they were targets, 400 guns. In the last column is the number of guns they were allowed to buy while under surveillance, more than 1,300 guns. Why is this important? Well, in a news conference in January, the then head of the ATF office in Phoenix, Bill Newell, claimed that his agents had taken down the nation's largest gun smuggling network, top to bottom, his words, when in fact critics say it got nothing more than those street-level buyers, those guys in the first column that they could have arrested before Fast and Furious even began.
We feel very strongly that we have completely dismantled, if not significantly dismantled, a major firearms trafficking organization that was funneling guns in the hundreds.
Let me go to Operation Fast and Furious you mentioned in your testimony. Mr. Attorney General, who was the highest level official in this administration who knew that these tactics were being used, and I'm talking about knew the tactics were being used before the death of Agent Brian Terry on December 15th, 2010?
Well, we know that the operation began in the field offices in Arizona, both in the U.S. Attorney's Office and in the ATF office there. The Inspector General is in the process of examining the
right,
way
but
in which...
to your knowledge, who was the highest-ranking official in the administration who knew about the tactics?
At this point, I can say that it started in Arizona, and I'm not at all certain who beyond that can be said to have been involved with regard to the use. Now, there was knowledge of it, but with regard to the use of the tactics, I don't certainly think we
no one other than ATF officials in Arizona, you're saying, knew about the tactics used in Operation Fast and Furious before December 15th, 2010. Is that right?
I think that in terms of knowledge of the tactics as opposed to the operation itself, I don't think that anybody in Washington knew about those tactics until the beginning of 2010.
Speaking of those tactics...
March 15th, 2010, before Brian Terry was gunned down. April 19th, 2010, before Brian Terry was gunned down. May 7th, 2010, before Brian Terry was gunned down. May 17th, 2010, before Brian Terry was gunned down. June 2nd, 2010, before Brian Terry was gunned down. July 2nd, the real date of our independence, 2010, obviously earlier, before Brian Terry was gunned down. These wiretap applications, which we did not subpoena, but which were given to us by a furious group of whistleblowers that are tired of your stonewalling, indicate that a number of key individuals in your administration, in fact, were responsible for information contained in here that clearly shows that the tactics of Fast and Furious were known. They were known and are contained in these wiretaps. I understand you've read these wiretaps since we brought them to your attention. Is that correct?
I have read them, and I disagree with the conclusion you've just reached.
When you realize that the federal government has essentially been arming these cartels. What goes through your mind?
We feel it's a betrayal. 42,000 people have been killed, and these weapons that our own government facilitated to these violent criminals in Mexico, 200 plus people we know have been killed by them. So there's responsibility for that. 200 plus. And we also now have our hero in the Border Patrol, as you know, Agent Brian Terry, killed on American soil. 3 guns have been found at the murder scene. All 3 of them were connected to this program. And so for us, I'm fearful, not just my deputies, other officers, citizens in America, that we're going to be facing the barrels of guns that have been put in the hands of the most violent criminals in North America. And who's going to be held accountable?
I want to read something that you said, or quoted as saying, if somebody gives a gun to somebody knowing they're going to commit murder, guess what we call them? We call them accomplices. Do you think the ATF have been accomplices to murder?
Absolutely.
So you're saying what they were doing was criminal?
Absolutely. Not just these individual agents, but people up the chain of command who have made the decision. The U.S. Attorney for Arizona just resigned. And this is a big deal. Now it's one step away from Eric Holder. This is his Department of Justice, and there are people who have lost their lives. We have broken countless treaties with our neighbor Mexico, and we have a hand and responsibility in this violence that has come to the United States. But more importantly, Mexico is our partner. They're not our enemy, and we facilitated guns into the cartels that have worked to topple the Mexican government.
From a law enforcement standpoint, I mean, did this operation make any sense at all?
It doesn't. Where it came from is this concept when we allow drugs or cash or sometimes a criminal walk. We may watch a crime in progress, and where we can take lawful action, we allow that criminal to go in an effort to watch its spiderweb and to see how many people we can catch. They use the same concept with weapons, and this is pure insanity. It's never been done before to give weapons like this, and their idea was to track the weapons. There was no tracking mechanism. Now all these guns are nowhere to be found, and for years this will haunt the conscience of America rightly.
And what we need to do is change the way in which people think about guns, especially young people. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way. And just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
The prospect of creating new behavior patterns quickly and efficiently became an obsession during the Cold War, when the Central Intelligence Agency assumed dominance in the field of mind control experimentation. During the Cold War, the national security state would take the logic of power to its logical conclusion. Known under the umbrella name MK-Ultra, mind control experimentation by the CIA would abandon any pretense to morality, leading to a nightmarish search for the holy grail of social engineering, a fully controlled, fully obedient human being.
All the evidence we have, every single indicator is that this is all Mr. Holmes's activity, and that he wasn't particularly aided by anyone else.
Well, new concerns today as the United Nations is now considering, at this moment, a global arms treaty that would curtail certain gun sales. Right now, the UN is working on a plan that would put a whole new set of international gun rules in place. Supporters, including the Obama administration, argue it will make the world more secure by tamping down on weapons commonly used by gangs and terrorists. But critics fear it would infringe on the Second Amendment right to bear arms right here in the United States.
The important thing to understand, however, is while it's interesting to look into the nature of modern society and see its fissures and fractures and stresses through multiple murderers, it should not be considered that these are the primary killers. Governments and politicians are the main killers. Indeed, some scholars have argued that the state's primary function is, as mass murderer, to wage war on other states. And that was how they developed. That's the social impetus for the development of the modern state. So it's kind of disturbing. We don't think of the state in that way, but that's what it is. Hitler and Stalin, between them, killed something like more than 100 million peoples, many of them their own peoples. This small-time personalized vengeance of a few serial killers and mass killers comes to nothing compared to them. The real killers are governments.